Hello, welcome to Non-Dual Christianity. In this video, we'll talk about the topic of hell. In this video specifically, we'll look at some of the biblical approach to it and then the non-dual perspective. I've done another video that talks more about some of the assumptions or why people tend to believe in hell in a more traditional Christian worldview. So from a non-dual standpoint, the biblical references to hell or to heaven really are all about a present reality. And in essence, it's a way of talking about, are you living in this moment from a state of perceived separation and lack, and therefore are experiencing the confusion and the suffering of that confusion, hell, right? Suffering, torment, and in this moment, or are you in tune with and accepting the underlying reality that your very nature is the divine essence, and therefore there's nothing to be achieved, nothing to be gained. You are already what you would most hope to be. You are united with the divine. You are the divine, which is the deepest and richest definition of heaven that there is. That's from the non-dual perspective. And we explore some of those in the videos of what is God and where is God, talking about it's impossible for something to exist without the divine being sustaining it. So from a biblical standpoint, you can see in the Old Testament, there are some very vague references to sheol, death, the grave, judgment after death, but there's really nothing that lends itself to the popular Christian conception of hell as it stands in today's world, as far as a place of eternal torment and torture. And that's really what I'm referring to when I say the more popular Christian concept is it's eternal and it's a place of torment and torture. So the Old Testament is fairly silent and murky as far as this whole afterlife, and the focus is very much on a present reality. Once we get to the New Testament, the majority of references of the actual word hell are used by Jesus himself in the Gospels. And it's interesting because the word he's using there, Gehenna, is actually a physical place outside of Jerusalem. It's in one of the valleys. I believe it's actually where they burn their trash. So you could see where far from referring to some sort of a future reality and torment, that the metaphor he could be using is using a place that everyone in his audience would be familiar with. His religious audience, by the way, he's speaking to Jews, the religious leaders. And in essence, he's saying, hey, if you're going to believe in this state of separation, in this more ego personality, just be aware that you're not where you think you are, because you're not accepting this deeper truth. So you think you're in the city, you think that you are experiencing all of these gifts, but really you're not. You're outside here. So it's more of a warning about a current condition of his listeners as compared to some sort of a threat about a future destination. And then outside of the Gospels, Revelation makes a couple references to the lake of fire, and there's a verse in Thessalonians that talks a little bit about judgment, but there's very little that would lend itself to 90% of the popular conceptions of what hell is. So from that standpoint, if you didn't start with assumptions that you already knew about hell because someone had told you, it would be very difficult to construct the picture that most Christians have of hell based on the actual biblical evidence. It's read into the passages as compared to coming from the passages. So just kind of as a summary then, from a non-dual perspective, this idea of an eternal destination where you can somehow be abandoned by God, separate from God, is impossible, because the divine gives rise to all of reality moment by moment. From the non-dual standpoint, really the most that could be said is if there is this judgment, and if there is such a thing as a second death, which the Bible mentions, and if that second death is in this realm of, what does it look like to be in heaven or hell, that second death would be more of a ceasing to exist of your current form. So perhaps it is a choice of, does your your limited form continue in some way, as we talked about in the death video, from a perishable to an imperishable body, or does that form simply dissolve back into the divine consciousness as infinite potential? That's really the most that could be said biblically, because as far as a place of eternal torture, abandonment by God, not possible. And therefore, when you hear passages in the Bible about hell, judgment, those types of things, the purpose of those is really a wake-up call in the moment. Which reality are you living in? Are you living as if the kingdom of God was present now, that this divine reality is true? Or are you living from this mistaken sense of separation and therefore suffering for it? Thank you for exploring this topic with me today.